Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now. When banlists are revealed in Yu-Gi-Oh, it often invokes many emotions in us duelists. For some, this is a day of joy and elation, as maybe their current deck recovers some lost support, or a dominant meta deck that just always had their number is finally hit. But for others, it can be the exact opposite, igniting your greatest rage or sadness, as your favorite deck might be forever fractured, or have nowhere near the power it once had. One thing, however, is certain. Around the time Yu-Gi-Oh players expect a new banlist, we all get a little anxious. That is, unless we have no idea that a new banlist is actually coming. While this concept may seem foreign for newer players, during the early eras of Yu-Gi-Oh, we almost always had concrete banlist dates, as they still use today in the OCG, so we always knew when to expect a new list. That is, until we didn't. My name is Mega Capital G, and I'd like to welcome you to the story of Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever emergency banlist. Before I jump into the story, however, I would like to make one thing clear, especially for those of you who watched my Yu-Gi-Oh story on Cyberstein. While Cyberstein was the first card in Yu-Gi-Oh history to be emergency banned in December 2006, it was the one and only thing Upper Deck adjusted on the FNL list at the time, so most players would probably not consider that a full banlist revision. However, in this story, it was a completely different ballgame. Our story begins all the way back in the GX era, early 2008, with the release of Phantom Darkness. This is one set that even months prior to its release in the TCG, players could just sense how powerful it was, and when it was finally released, it sure as hell didn't disappoint, as it hit the game like a wrecking ball. Prior to the release of Phantom Darkness, the format at the time was moderately slow. Proof of this could be seen at Shonen Jump Orlando, where Cedric Sequoia won the event with a control-based Light and Darkness Dragon deck. This same event saw gadgets, other Monarch variants, and even Macrocosmos Control make the top cut as well. However, things completely changed next month in February when Phantom Darkness was finally legal. At Shonen Jump Houston, it became very apparent that the meta was heading in a bold new direction. While YouTube's Jonathan Moore shockingly won the event piloting Six Samurai, ironically thanks to powerful new support in Phantom Darkness itself, like Six Samurai United, you could see signs of this set's fingerprints all over the top cut. As we went into Shonen Jump Costa Mesa, there was a decent sentiment in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that John's Six Samurai deck would be able to hang with the many Dark Arm and Diamond Dude variants that were bound to make the top cut, and that sentiment was obliterated almost immediately. For starters, the variety we saw at Houston's top cut was shattered. Only 6 players out of the top 32 didn't use Dark Arm Dragon or Allure Darkness, and while many often refer to this format as Dark Arm or Dad Return, what is often lost and forgotten is how many other incredibly strong dark-based decks there were in the game at the time. While Lazaro Bolito would ultimately win Costa Mesa with Dad Return, another legendary Team Overdose member, Chris Perovic, would actually make second place with Diamond Dude Turbo. There were also 3 players in the top 32 playing pure Magical Explosion or siding it with Diamond Dude Turbo, and if you're wondering why Diamond Dude Turbo had such a resurgence at this time, a lot of it had to do with the release of Allure and Phantom Darkness. While Diamond Dude Turbo was almost always a strong contender during the GX era, as was its short-lived other variant, Airblade Turbo, having combined to win 2 Shonen Jump championships and being the runner-up at 2 more, the deck didn't exactly have the easiest time dealing with Light and Darkness Dragon or Macrocosmos, both of which were huge players in the meta prior to the release of Phantom Darkness. But with the added speed of being able to run 2 to 3 copies of Allure Darkness, Diamond Dude was able to keep up with the speed of the game while the other decks were not, hence they were abandoned and Diamond Dude rose. The 2 biggest side effects of Phantom Darkness were the speed increase of the game and how the amount of OTK and FTKs, whether planned or not, absolutely skyrocketed, the latter being the driving force for the creation of the later emergency ban list. We've already touched on Dad Return, Diamond Dude, and Magical Explosion and how they were all viable high-tier decks, but I really need to emphasize why, which will actually explain a lot of the OTKs as well. During this time in the game, Destiny Heroes and Stratos by proxy were insanely popular. Summoning Stratos to search a D hero only to discard it for Destiny draw was an extremely common play. However, with the release of Allure of Darkness, all of those D powered decks got another draw too that could be used with any monster in the entire archetype. Add that to the fact that common D heroes like Dogma and Plasma were both level 8, and coincidentally, Phantom Darkness also released some powerful Dark level 8 monsters like the Dark Creator, Dark Lord Zerato, and Dark Nithis. You should now have a pretty clear picture of how a typical Dark Arm turn would look like. Summoning Stratos, searching a Destiny hero to essentially burn through maybe as much as 70% of your deck during the first turn, with Dark Magician of Chaos, who I might add was without a doubt the best monster in the entire game during this format. Every single one of those Dark decks could get back any spell that they choose for free. Since Monster Reborn and Premature Burial were both legal, a DMOC sent to the graveyard usually didn't stay there very long. By the way, this is all without mentioning Trade-In, which was also incredibly popular at the time as well. As I said, there were a lot of incredibly strong level 8 dark monsters, and Trade-In just made it so that you can dig deeper into your deck. It was also fantastic in Diamond Dude Turbo because it was another spell that if you actually hit it off Diamond Dude would essentially let you go +2 during your next turn for free. Next up was the biggest win button in the entire game, and its protege. Dimension Fusion was inarguably the best card in the game. The only thing that even came close at this time was Dark Magician of Chaos. For a mere 2,000 life points, you could summon up to 5 monsters, which nearly guaranteed your opponent's in. To make OTKing laughably even easier, you would usually summon huge dark monsters back from Dimension Fusion that didn't just serve as beat sticks. Dark Lord Zerato would be a Regeki that would clear the path for you to win the duel. Genzo and Diamond Dude Turbo would lock out those pesky traps like Mirror Force and Torrential Tributes, and Dark Magician of Chaos would serve as pretty much the ultimate utility card at this point. If your opponent had a big monster on the board, get back your Brain Control from the graveyard and just kill them with their own monster, or grab Lightning Vortex back from the grave and basically do the same thing you would with Dark Lord Zerato. Return from the different dimension, while not nearly as strong as Dimension Fusion, its bigger brother, because it did have to be set, did allow you to pull off some pretty dirty plays in its own right. First off, it could be used during the battle phase. Secondly, much like Solemn Judgment, you technically always had the life points required to activate it, no matter how low your opponent pushed you. And lastly, the card was actually chainable, so this meant that it could be used defensively if you were in an extremely desperate situation. As you've probably guessed by now, this additional draw power combined with so many ways to summon 5 monsters on the field at once led to games lasting about 3 turns flat. If Magical Explosion players didn't draw out their entire deck by turn 2 and just blow you up with burn damage, then a Dark Arm or DDD Duelist would definitely hit Return or Dimension Fusion, or maybe even another random OTK like dropping 2 copies of Dark Arm and then using a Monster Reborn for DMOC. Either way, the format was lightning fast, and after Shonen Jump Columbus, Upper Deck realized that they had a problem on their hands. Now, I've already devoted an entire Yu-Gi-Oh story called Darker Than Black to Shonen Jump Columbus 2008, but I'll quickly summarize. In addition to all the mess we already had in the format thanks to Phantom Darkness, this Shonen Jump also popularized Cyber Valley and Dark Arm Dragon decks, thanks to the eventual winner, Jerry Wang. But that's not to lead you to believe that Valley wasn't already a well-known card. Cyber Valley alongside Machine Duplication was already being used as the new lifeblood for the Magical Explosion OTK deck. Ironically, Cyber Dragon itself was basically a microcosm of the Phantom Darkness set. It had multiple effects, including a very useful draw 2, and at the same time, its effect included many ways to banish your monsters, which of course you would summon back from Return from the different dimension or Dimension Fusion. The major thing Columbus did was cement the notion that pure OTK and FTK strategies like Explosion were completely viable at the highest level. For you see, this was the infamous event in which Aaron Diaz nearly won with the Shadow of Priestess FTK and ended up being the runner-up. Add that to the 2 other players in top 8 who played pure FTK decks revolving around the Priestess, Toon Cannon Soldier, and Spell Economics, and you start to get an idea of why this event was so infamous. So as degenerate as you might believe that this format was by now because of the overabundance of 3-turn Yu-Gi-Oh duels and decks like Magical Explosion being widely viable, it actually got significantly worse with Shonen Jump Columbus because everyone dropped Magical Explosion for these spell economic based FTKs. After all, why give your opponent a turn when you don't have to? As Shonen Jump Minneapolis concluded, where Paul Leviton from Team Overdose shocked the Yu-Gi-Oh world by taking down Dad Return with Shadow Imprisoning Gladiator Beast, it was still pretty clear that Dad Return was considered the best deck of the format. After all, it still took 75% of the top cut at Minneapolis and was heavily dominating the regional circuit. This is when Upper Deck, who managed the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG, proved for a second time that they weren't just going to sit back and wait for Konami to address what they deemed problems in the game on their next ban list. Upper Deck game designer Dan Snyder, who had previously been the employee who issued the emergency banning of Cyberstein, once again put out an official memo to all Yu-Gi-Oh TCG players, judges, and tournament organizers that to continually promote a diverse and enjoyable play environment, they would be updating the forbidden and limited list way ahead of schedule. This was monumental because just like Cyberstein, we had absolutely no prior knowledge that such a thing was going to take place at this time. Also, this time around, the American, Canadian, and European championships were just months away. That's right, Upper Deck gave us this emergency ban list during national season. The new ban list, which now had Dimension Fusion banned, Return from a Different Dimension at limited status, and Allure Darkness semi-limited, went into effect one day before Shonen Jump Nashville. If you expected Dad Return to fall off because of these hits, and maybe that Glads would take over because they won the previous Shonen Jump, you were going to be severely disappointed. Dark Arm not only won Shonen Jump Nashville, but it was a mirror match in the finals, and Glad Beast in fact did not even make the top cut at all. Now, as we all know, with the release of Light of Destruction just 1 week after Nashville, Glads would get Gladiator Beast Grizaris and would permanently surpass the Dad Return deck before it would be reborn as Teledad and will return the favor to Glads. This pretty much leads us to the end of the story, and I know that it might not sound that crazy, but at the time it was absolutely shocking that Upper Deck had again decided to pretty much drop a ban list out of nowhere. I personally think that a very small factor was probably Upper Deck believing that Lightsworn had zero chance coming out of the gate against the full power of everything Phantom Darkness Unleashed, and maybe they were trying to give Lightsworn a little bit more of an opportunity. I think another thing that people often forget about this format is that Allure Darkness was actually a TCG exclusive, so the version that we got in the TCG of Dad Return was significantly stronger than what the OCG players were playing when Phantom Darkness was first released over there. I also think that Upper Deck probably felt partially responsible because they're the ones that designed Allure Darkness, not actually Konami, so it was a little bit of them cleaning up their own mess. But whatever you guys thought of this Yu-Gi-Oh story, and if you guys enjoy these Yu-Gi-Oh story videos, leave it in the comment section below. These are actually my favorite videos to make because it allows me to reminisce about the old days of Yu-Gi-Oh and at the same time kind of educate newer players to the game about, you know, the days before they were actually playing. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already and turn on that notification bell for daily videos. Subscribing makes life happy.